Open the lane, Captain. This is your last chance.
No. The lane stays closed.
That's it. You're under arrest!
The sun was high and unforgiving, baking the asphalt of Interstate 15 into a shimmering mirage. To Captain Marcus Thorne of the San Bernardino County Fire Department, the heat was just another factor in a complex equation of survival. For 32 years, he had operated in the crucible where physics and human fragility collided with brutal force. Today's equation was written in twisted steel, shattered glass, and the faint, coppery scent of blood carried on the dry desert wind. A 6-car pileup, initiated by a blown tire on a semi-truck, had turned the northbound lanes into a scrapyard. His engine company, E31, had been first on the scene, and Thorne, as the ranking officer, had immediately assumed incident command. His voice, calm and measured, cut through the cacophony of groaning metal and distant sirens. Miller, Jackson, jaws on the minivan. We've got 2 critical, pinned. Peterson, triage on the sedan. Let's get a count. Davis, I want a full lane closure, 200 feet back. No one, and I mean no one, but emergency personnel passed that line. His orders were not suggestions. They were the product of thousands of hours of training and hundreds of real-world incidents where a single moment of distraction, a single vehicle encroaching on the scene, could turn rescuers into victims. The space he was creating wasn't just a workspace, it was a sanctuary. Inside this bubble, his crew could focus entirely on the delicate, dangerous work of extricating mangled bodies from mangled machines without worrying about a gawking driver drifting into their backs. He'd seen it happen. A young paramedic, vibrant and full of promise, struck and killed by a driver texting about the very accident she was working. The memory was a cold stone in his gut, a permanent reminder of why protocols were written in blood. Thorne, at 54, moved with an economy of motion that bespoke deep competence. His face, etched with the lines of a man who had witnessed the full spectrum of human tragedy, was a mask of professional focus. His turnout coat, blackened with the soot of 1,000 fires and marked with the grime of countless wrecks, was a testament to his career. He wasn't a man given to theatrics or ego. He was a commander, and his sole objective was bringing order to chaos and life from the brink of death. He surveyed the scene from a slight rise on the shoulder. The minivan was the worst. Its front end was compressed to half its original length, accordioned into the back of a flatbed truck. Inside, a husband and wife were trapped, their legs crushed. Paramedics were already at the windows, establishing IV lines, speaking words of comfort that were likely lost in the haze of shock and pain. The sound of the hydraulic rescue tool, the jaws of life, began its powerful rhythmic groan, a mechanical prayer for the trapped. His men worked like a well-oiled machine, each knowing his role without a word needing to be exchanged. This was the symphony of a professional rescue operation, and Thorne was its conductor. He had established a command post at the rear of his engine, a mobile nerve center from which he coordinated the incoming flow of ambulances, additional engine companies, and law enforcement. A California Highway Patrol cruiser was already on scene, its officer directing traffic to the single open lane, a necessary but dangerous concession to the relentless pressure of the interstate. Thorne had wanted all lanes closed, but protocol dictated keeping one open if possible. He had compromised, but he would not compromise further. The single blocked lane was his line in the sand, the absolute minimum required for safety. His radio crackled. "Command, this is Miller. We're making progress on the driver's side door, but the dash is wrapped around his legs. Gonna be a slow extraction." "Copy that. Miller, take your time. Safety is paramount." Thorne replied, his eyes scanning the perimeter. He saw the cones and flares his team had deployed. A visual wall reinforcing his command. The world outside that wall, the miles of backed-up traffic, the frustrated drivers, the ticking clocks of commerce, was irrelevant. Inside this zone, only one thing mattered: the preservation of life, both for the victims and for his crew. It was a simple, inviolable principle. In his 32 years, no one in his command had ever been seriously injured on a highway scene. It was a record he intended to keep. He didn't know, couldn't know, that his biggest threat that day wasn't the unstable wreckage or the risk of a fire, but the approaching sirens of a man who saw the world not as a complex equation of safety, but as a simple problem of authority. A man who saw Thorne's carefully constructed sanctuary not as a necessity, but as an inconvenience. An inconvenience he was determined to remove. Deputy Kyle Brennan, 36 years old and 5 years with the Sheriff's Department, saw the world in black and white, in terms of compliance and obstruction. He drove his patrol SUV with a controlled aggression, weaving through the snarled traffic on the shoulder, his siren blaring. To him, the miles of stationary cars weren't a consequence of a tragedy. They were a failure of flow, a disruption of order, and his job was to restore order. When he arrived on the scene, his first impression wasn't of the life-saving ballet being performed by the firefighters. It was of the single-blocked lane of traffic. An entire lane, empty save for an ambulance and a fire engine, while thousands of people sat idle. It struck him as inefficient, excessive. He parked his vehicle at a sharp angle just inside the cone line, a territorial move, and stepped out into the oppressive heat. His partner, Deputy Frank Gable, a quiet, older man who had learned that riding with Brennan was easiest when you kept your mouth shut, followed a step behind. Brennan's uniform was crisp, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He projected an aura of sharp-edged authority, a stark contrast to the grimy, functional appearance of the firefighters. He scanned the scene, his eyes skipping over the frantic work at the minivan and landing on the command post. He saw Thorne, a man whose calm demeanor he immediately misinterpreted as a lack of urgency. "Who's in charge here?" Brennan's voice was sharp, designed to cut through noise and command attention. One of the younger firefighters, Davis, pointed a gloved hand toward Thorne. "Captain Thorne! He's IC!" Brennan strode toward Thorne, his movements radiating impatience. He saw the blocked lane not as a safety buffer, but as a monument to one man's ego. In his mind, firefighters were the cleanup crew. They put out fires and cut people out of cars. Law enforcement, his department, handled the big picture: scene security, traffic, control. He believed in a clear hierarchy, and in his version of it, the badge outranked the fire helmet. It was a dangerously simplistic view, one that had been reinforced by a string of minor jurisdictional squabbles where his aggressive certainty had won the day against less forceful personalities. He had never encountered a man like Marcus Thorne. "Captain," Brennan began, stopping a few feet from the command post. He didn't offer his name or ask for a situation report. "You need to open this lane up. Traffic is backed up for 10 miles. We're going to have secondary accidents." Thorne turned to face him, his expression unreadable. He gave the deputy a slow, deliberate assessment, noting the rigid posture and the challenging tone. He had dealt with cops like this before, young, ambitious, more concerned with command than cooperation. "I'm Captain Thorne, County Fire. And you are?" "Deputy Brennan, Sheriff's Department. This lane needs to be cleared. Now." Thorne's gaze drifted back to the minivan, where his crew was working feverishly. He could see the intense concentration on their faces, the sweat pouring down their necks. They were operating inches from passing traffic in the one open lane. The noise was already a distraction. The vibration of a semi rolling past at 60 miles per hour could shift the delicate balance of the wreckage. Opening the second lane would place a river of 2-ton steel projectiles just a few feet from their backs. It was unthinkable. "Negative. Deputy," Thorne said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "This lane is a safety buffer for my crew. It remains closed until my people are clear." Brennan's jaw tightened. It was the answer he had expected, and the one he was prepared to fight. He saw it as a challenge to his authority, to the authority of his department. "I'm not asking. Captain, this is a traffic management issue, and that falls under our jurisdiction. The highway patrolman on scene agrees with me. You're impeding flow." "I'm ensuring my men go home tonight," Thorne countered, his voice dropping slightly, gaining an edge of cold steel. "There are 2 souls trapped in that van. My crew is focused on them. My focus is on my crew. That's the chain of command on this scene. Your traffic problem can wait." Gable, Brennan's partner, shifted his weight uneasily. He could sense the shift in the air, the hardening of positions. He had seen Brennan do this before, push and push until he got his way. But there was something different about the fire captain. A deep, unshakable certainty that wasn't born of ego, but of something older, more profound. Brennan, however, saw only defiance. "You don't have the authority to shut down a state highway." "Thorne, we do." He gestured vaguely toward the backed-up traffic, a sea of glinting windshields under the brutal sun. "That's the bigger picture. You're too focused on your little corner of the world." Thorne took a half-step closer, forcing Brennan to meet his gaze. The calm was still there, but beneath it, a fire was burning. "Deputy, that little corner of the world contains my firefighters and the people they are trying to save. It's the only world that matters right now. This conversation is over. Stay out of my scene." He turned his back on Brennan, a clear dismissal, and keyed his radio. "Miller, what's your status?" The act of being turned away, of being dismissed by a firefighter in front of his own partner, was more than Brennan's pride could stomach. The color rose in his neck. His perception of the scene had narrowed to a single point: the man in the dirty coat who had just challenged him. He saw Thorne not as a fellow first responder, but as an obstacle. And Kyle Brennan was a man who cleared obstacles. He took a deep breath, his mind made up. This wasn't about traffic anymore. This was about who was in charge. The dismissal cut Brennan deeper than any shout could have. Thorne turning his back was a clear statement. "You are not relevant to this operation." For a man whose entire professional identity was built on being in control, it was an intolerable insult. His partner, Gable, saw the shift in Brennan's posture, the tightening of his shoulders, and felt a familiar knot of dread in his stomach. He knew what was coming next. "I am not going to be ignored," Brennan said, his voice low and strained. He stepped forward, placing himself directly in Thorne's path as the captain tried to move toward the active rescue. Thorne stopped, his patience, a resource he guarded carefully, now worn thin. "Deputy, I have given you a lawful order in my capacity as incident commander. The scene is not secure for additional traffic. Now, step aside, or I will have you removed." It was a statement of fact, backed by state law and decades of operational protocol governing multi-agency emergency scenes. The incident command system was designed specifically to prevent this kind of jurisdictional pissing match. On a fire or rescue scene, the ranking fire officer was in charge until the incident was stabilized. It was a rule known by every rookie cop and firefighter. Brennan either didn't know it, or in his anger, had chosen to forget. "You have no authority to give me orders," Brennan snapped, his face flushing with anger. "And you damn sure don't have the authority to remove me. I'm the law here. This he said, jabbing a finger toward the blocked lane, is a public thoroughfare. You are illegally blocking it. It's a hot zone. Deputy, a kill zone, Thorne shot back, his voice rising for the first time, a controlled burn of frustration. You see an empty lane. I see the space that keeps a semi from sideswiping my engineer and turning this rescue into a recovery. Your lack of experience is showing. The jab at his experience was a calculated risk, but Thorne was done with pleasantries. The life of his crew was on the line. But for Brennan, it was the final straw. He interpreted the comment not as a statement of operational reality, but as a personal attack on his competence. His ego, now fully in command of his actions, demanded retribution. That's it, Brennan said, his voice cold. I've given you a direct order to clear this lane. You have refused. That's obstruction. Thorne stared at him, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He had been challenged on scenes before, had argued with cops over perimeters and access, but this was different. This was a willful, dangerous ignorance. You can't be serious. Obstructing what? Your desire to get traffic moving 5 minutes sooner at the cost of human life? Don't be a fool. Open the lane. Captain, this is your last chance. Brennan's hand drifted down, resting near the handle of his sidearm, a subtle but unmistakable escalation. The movement was not lost on Thorne, nor on the handful of firefighters and paramedics who were now watching the confrontation unfold. Their work on the victims momentarily forgotten. The rhythmic groan of the jaws of life faltered and then stopped. The relative quiet that descended on the scene was thick with tension. Thorne stood his ground. He looked past Brennan, at the faces of his crew, who were looking back at him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and solidarity. They trusted him to keep them safe. That trust was a sacred bond, one he would not break for any man, especially not for an arrogant deputy on a power trip. No, Thorne said, his voice resonating with the finality of a closing steel door. The lane stays closed. He made a slight turn, intending to walk away and re-engage with the rescue. Considering the matter closed, it was a fatal miscalculation. He had assessed the tactical situation of the crash perfectly, but he had failed to comprehend the volatility of the man standing in front of him. Brennan, feeling disrespected, challenged, and now publicly defied, saw only one path forward. He was the law, and the law had been broken. He would enforce it. All right, you're done, Brennan said, stepping forward and grabbing Thorne's arm. The sudden physical contact sent a shockwave through the assembled first responders. Firefighters instinctively took a step forward, their camaraderie overriding any sense of interdepartmental protocol. Gable, Brennan's partner, blanched, his eyes wide. Kyle, what are you doing? He whispered, but his partner wasn't listening. Thorne, stunned by the assault, instinctively tensed. Get your hands off me, deputy! You're under arrest, Brennan declared, his voice ringing out in the tense silence. He was already reaching for his handcuffs. Obstruction of a peace officer. The words seemed to hang in the hot, dry air, nonsensical and surreal. A fire captain, a 32-year veteran, the incident commander of a major rescue operation, being arrested by a deputy sheriff in the middle of his own scene for doing his job. It was more than a breach of protocol. It was a perversion of the entire system they were all sworn to uphold. It was the moment that chaos truly took command. For a long moment, no one moved. The concept was so alien, so fundamentally wrong, that the brains of the assembled first responders struggled to process it. Captain Thorne, their captain, a man synonymous with calm command, was being arrested. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. Thorne himself was frozen for a second, not from fear, but from sheer, unadulterated disbelief. He looked down at the deputy's hand on his arm, then back up at his face. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, son," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The warning, the paternalistic son, only fueled Brennan's fire. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." He tugged on Thorne's arm, trying to force him into compliance. Thorne, a solidly built man, didn't budge. He wasn't resisting, merely standing his ground. "I am the incident commander on this scene. You are interfering with a rescue operation. You are endangering lives." "You've endangered this whole highway," Brennan retorted, his voice rising, betraying the insecurity behind his aggressive posture. He was in too deep to back down now. He had crossed a line, and the only way forward was to prove he was right by sheer force of will. He reached for Thorne's other arm. "Don't resist." The word resist was the trigger. It was a word that carried legal weight, a justification for what was about to happen. Thorne's crew, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally found their voices. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" shouted Miller, the firefighter who had been operating the jaws of life. He dropped his tool and started moving forward, his face a mask of fury. "Get off our captain!" "Stay back," Brennan yelled, pulling his sidearm from its holster and holding it low, pointed at the ground but clearly visible. It was a shocking escalation, a move of pure intimidation. The sight of the gun stopped Miller and the other firefighters in their tracks. Their anger was now mixed with a cold dose of fear. This deputy was out of control. Gable, Brennan's partner, finally spoke up, his voice pleading. "Brennan, for God's sake, stop. This is insane. He's obstructing. He refused a lawful order." Brennan shouted, his focus entirely on Thorne. He holstered his weapon, the threat having served its purpose, and in the same motion yanked a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Last time, turn. Around." Thorne looked from the gun back to Brennan's face, and in that moment, he made a decision. He could fight this. He could physically resist, and his crew would back him. The scene would devolve into an all-out brawl between firefighters and sheriff's deputies, right next to a mangled van with 2 critically injured people inside. It was an outcome he could not allow. His duty, as always, was to de-escalate, to protect the integrity of the rescue, even if it meant his own humiliation. With a look of profound disgust, he slowly, deliberately, turned and placed his hands behind his back. He would comply with the arrest to prevent a riot. It was the ultimate act of command, sacrificing himself for the good of the mission. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed in the silence. The sound was obscene, a desecration. Brennan, breathing heavily, cinched the cuffs tight, a clear act of punitive aggression. He grabbed Thorne by the arm and began marching him toward his patrol car, a conquering hero in his own mind. The firefighters watched, helpless and enraged. Their leader, their mentor, was being paraded in front of them like a common criminal. The carefully constructed order of the rescue scene had shattered. The disciplined focus was gone, replaced by a confused, angry paralysis. Who was in charge now? What were they supposed to do? The paramedics at the minivan looked over, their faces etched with alarm. The delicate work of keeping the victims alive had been violently interrupted. As Brennan pushed Thorne past the command post, the captain spoke, his voice clear and steady, for all to hear. "Someone notify Battalion Chief Wallace. Tell him the Sheriff's Department has assumed command of this incident." He then looked directly at Brennan. "You better pray those people in that van live, deputy, because you just became responsible for whatever happens next." The words hung in the air as the door of the patrol car slammed shut, sealing Thorne inside. Brennan, ignoring his partner's horrified stare, got behind the wheel. The arrest was complete, But the incident, the real incident, had just begun. The moment the patrol car carrying Captain Thorne pulled away, the invisible structure holding the rescue operation together disintegrated. The disciplined choreography of E-31 devolved into a collection of stunned, angry individuals. The rhythmic pulse of the scene, the communication, the shared purpose, the unspoken trust, flatlined. Miller, the senior firefighter, stood frozen, the hydraulic hoses of the jaws of life slack in his hands. His eyes were fixed on the spot where his captain had been arrested. A 30-year veteran, a man who had taught him everything he knew about fire service, led away in cuffs. The sheer wrongness of it left him reeling. "What? What do we do?" someone asked. It was a question no one had an answer to. Thorne was the answer. He was the brain of their operation. Without him, they were just limbs. The paralysis lasted only a moment before it was replaced by a simmering rage. "He can't do that. That's illegal," Firefighter Jackson yelled, slamming a gloved fist against the side of the engine. "Who the hell does that cop think he is?" "Someone get Wallace on the horn, now!" Miller finally roared, shaking himself from his stupor. He was the senior man, and in the absence of a captain, command fell to him, but he was an operator, a tool man. He wasn't Thorne. He didn't have the captain's gift for seeing the whole board, for managing a dozen moving parts with effortless calm. He felt the weight of command settle on him not as a mantle, but as a crushing stone. While one of the younger firefighters fumbled with the radio, trying to raise their battalion chief, the immediate crisis reasserted itself. A paramedic, his voice strained, yelled from the minivan, "We're losing her! BP is dropping fast. We need that door open 5 minutes ago." The urgent plea cut through the anger. Miller and Jackson scrambled back to the wreck, but their movements were clumsy, their focus shattered. Every first responder knows that your emotional state directly impacts your performance. A calm mind performs complex tasks smoothly. A mind consumed by rage and confusion makes mistakes. The jaws of life, which minutes before had been an extension of Miller's will, now felt heavy and foreign. The delicate process of cutting the door hinges was replaced by a frustrated, brute force attack. Meanwhile, Deputy Gable, Brennan's abandoned partner, stood alone and exposed. He was the remaining symbol of the department that had just committed this act of madness. He faced a wall of hostile glares from the firefighters. He held up his hands, a gesture of peace. "Look, I didn't know he was going to do that. I told him to stop." "You didn't do a damn thing." Peterson, the firefighter who had been on triage, shot back. "You just stood there and watched." The accusation hung in the air, true and undeniable. Gable's silence, his failure to intervene, had made him complicit. He was adrift, his partner gone, his authority on the scene non-existent. The CHP officer, who had watched the entire arrest unfold with a look of slack-jawed astonishment, walked over. What in the Sam Hill was that? "Gable, you guys just arrested the IC of a major incident." Brennan said he was obstructing. Gable mumbled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Obstructing? He was protecting his men. That's his job." The CHP officer exclaimed. "This is a cluster. Who's in charge now? You?" Gable looked around at the chaotic scene. The smooth flow of operations was gone. The paramedics were shouting for equipment. The firefighters were arguing among themselves. The safety perimeter Thorne had established was beginning to fray as firefighters, distracted and angry, moved in and out of the so-called safe lane. He knew he was supposed to take charge, to restore order, but he had no idea how. He hadn't been paying attention to the rescue. He had been watching his partner's ego explode. He had no report, no plan. The order Brennan had claimed to be restoring had been annihilated, and pure chaos reigned in its place. The very thing Brennan had accused Thorne of causing, a dangerous, disorganized scene, was now a reality, created by his own hand. The bitter irony was lost on no one but Brennan himself. The traffic, the supposed catalyst for the whole disaster, remained at a dead standstill. Its occupants now witnessed to a bizarre and frightening spectacle of official infighting. The secondary accidents Brennan had been so concerned about were now far more likely, not because of a blocked lane, but because there was no longer a single, coherent command structure to manage the scene. The foundation had been ripped out, and the whole house was coming down. Police Sergeant Jacob Miller wasn't a man who startled easily. 25 years on the force, 10 of them as a road supervisor, had sanded away most of his rough edges, leaving behind a core of pragmatic calm. But the garbled, frantic call that came over his radio made him sit bolt upright. It wasn't the report of the multi-car pileup. That was routine. It was the follow-up from the CHP officer on scene, his voice tight with disbelief. Be advised, a county fire captain has been taken into custody by a sheriff's deputy. The scene is unstable. Miller threw his cruiser into gear, his mind racing. Arrested a fire captain? On scene? The idea was so monumentally stupid, so contrary to every protocol of interagency cooperation, that it felt like a prank. But he knew the CHP officer, a steady veteran who didn't engage in hyperbole. Something had gone terribly wrong. He arrived to a scene that was worse than he imagined from a distance. It looked like any other major incident. Up close, it was a jurisdictional nightmare. He saw firefighters huddled together, gesturing angrily. He saw a lone deputy, Gable, looking pale and lost. He saw paramedics working with a desperate intensity, their faces grim. The efficient, professional hum of a well-run rescue was gone, replaced by an atmosphere thick with tension and confusion. The first person to approach him was the CHP officer. "Thank God you're here, Jake," the officer said, his relief palpable. "Your boy Brennan just lit this whole scene on fire and drove off with the match." He quickly recounted the events, the argument over the lane, the refusal, the shocking arrest of Captain Thorne. Miller listened, his expression growing colder with every word. He knew Deputy Brennan. He knew his reputation for being aggressive, for having a short fuse, for seeing every interaction as a contest of wills. He had verbally counseled him twice for confrontational behavior during traffic stops. He had a sinking feeling he knew exactly how this had unfolded. Brennan's ego had signed a check his authority couldn't cash. "Where is Captain Thorne now?" Miller asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Brennan took him, said he was taking him to the county jail for processing. The CHP officer replied. Miller's jaw clenched. Processing, as if the incident commander was a common drunk. And who is in command of the fire rescue now? Their senior firefighter is trying, but he's overwhelmed. He's a good tool guy, not a commander. The whole crew is rattled. Jake. They're pissed, and they're distracted. It's not safe. Miller's gaze swept the scene, his experienced eyes taking in the details. The firefighters' body language was all wrong. They were bunched up, not spread out. Their focus was divided between the wreck and the deputies. The safety lane Thorne had established was now being used by personnel as a staging area, the very thing it was designed to prevent. It was a textbook example of how to lose control of an incident. He saw Gable standing by his cruiser, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. Miller strode over to him. "Gable, report, now." Miller's tone left no room for excuses. Gable stammered through his account, trying to frame Brennan's actions as a response to a lack of cooperation. Miller cut him off. "Did Captain Thorne threaten anyone?" "No. Sergeant, did he articulate a reason for keeping the lane closed? He said it was for the safety of his crew, Gable admitted quietly. A reason that is explicitly covered and justified under the state's incident command protocols. Miller finished for him, his voice laced with ice. Did you make any attempt to de-escalate the situation? Did you try to stop your partner from making the worst decision of his career? Gable looked at the ground. I suggested he calm down. You suggested... Unacceptable, Miller said, his disgust plain. You stood by and allowed this to happen. You are just as culpable. He pulled out his radio. Dispatch. I need you to contact Battalion Chief Wallace of the Fire Department. Have him meet me at the I-15 command post immediately, and get me Deputy Brennan on his cell phone. Now. As he spoke, he saw the flashing lights of another vehicle approaching. It was a Fire Department Command SUV, driving faster and more aggressively than was typical. It pulled up, and a man in a white fire helmet and a clean chief's coat stepped out. His face was thunderous. Battalion Chief Daniel Wallace. He had clearly heard the news. Miller knew this was the moment the storm would truly break. The blunder of one deputy was about to become a full-blown war between two departments. Battalion Chief Daniel Wallace moved like a thundercloud rolling in over the desert. He was a big man, a former smoke jumper who had transitioned into command, and he carried an air of absolute no-nonsense authority. He bypassed the junior officers and made a beeline for Sergeant Miller, his eyes blazing. "Miller, where is my captain?" Wallace's voice was a low rumble that promised an earthquake. "Chief," Miller began, holding up a hand in a gesture meant to be placating. "We are dealing with the situation." "Dealing with it? I got a call that one of your deputies arrested Marcus Thorne in the middle of an extrication, not detained. Arrested. You have 60 seconds to tell me that's a lie before I call the sheriff himself." "It's not a lie, Chief. And it was a unilateral action by one deputy that I am in the process of rectifying," Miller said, his tone carefully professional, even as he internally cursed Brennan to the high heavens. He knew that how he handled this moment would determine whether this spiraled into a decade-long feud or could be contained. Deputy Brennan exceeded his authority. He's been ordered to return Captain Thorne to this scene immediately. Wallace stared at him, his jaw working silently. He looked over at the rescue, at the disorganized mess it had become. He could see the stress and anger on his firefighters' faces. He looked at the minivan, a mangled prison for two critically injured people. "Because of your deputy, this extrication has been delayed by at least 10 minutes. If those people die, their blood is on your department's hands." The accusation was brutal, but Miller knew it was true. In emergency services, minutes, even seconds, were the currency of life. Brennan hadn't just arrested a man, he had stolen time from the dying. "I understand, Chief, and there will be a full accounting for that." Miller turned to Gable, who was still standing by, pale and silent. "Gable, your vehicle and Deputy Brennan's vehicle, both are equipped with dash cameras, correct?" "Yes, Sergeant," Gable mumbled. "And you were both wearing active body cameras?" "Yes, Sergeant." Miller's focus narrowed. The video, the unblinking, objective witness. In the chaos and the conflicting stories that were sure to come, the video would be the only ground truth. "Consider all video and audio recordings from this incident to be evidence in an official internal affairs investigation. You will not access it. You will not delete it. You will not speak about it to anyone but me or an IA investigator. A technician will pull the files directly from the servers under my authority. Do you understand?" "Yes, Sergeant," Gable said, the full weight of his predicament finally crashing down on him. His silence, his inaction, was on that video 2. Wallace, who had overheard the exchange, stepped closer. You better believe we want a copy of that footage. Miller, my captain's reputation isn't going to be dragged through the mud by some hothead rookie's report. You will get it through official channels. Chief, I promise you that. Miller assured him. He then keyed his radio again, his voice now carrying the unmistakable edge of command. Dispatch. Give me a supervisor from the jail. I want them to know that if a Captain Marcus Thorne of the County Fire Department arrives for booking, he is to be immediately released to me. No paperwork, no process. Hold him in the Sally Port. Am I clear? 10-4, Sergeant, the dispatcher replied, a hint of surprise in her voice. Just then, Miller's cell phone rang. It was Brennan. Miller turned away from Wallace, shielding the phone for a semblance of privacy. Brennan, what is your 20? I'm about 5 minutes from the county jail. Sergeant, I have the suspect in custody. The word suspect was like a lit match on gasoline. Miller's control finally snapped. He is not a suspect, you imbecile. He is the incident commander of a major rescue that you just abandoned. You have created a disaster, violated every protocol we have, and exposed this department to catastrophic liability. You will turn your vehicle around now. You will return Captain Thorne to the scene. You will hand me your firearm, your badge, and your keys. You are relieved of duty pending investigation. Is that understood? There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Brennan's voice, smaller now, stripped of its earlier bravado. Sergeant, he was obstructing. I will see it on the video, Miller roared, his voice echoing across the chaotic scene. And if it shows what I think it shows, you're finished. Now get back here. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. He turned back to Wallace, his face grim. He's bringing him back. Wallace just nodded, his eyes still fixed on the rescue. He knew this was far from over. The arrest may have been a mistake by one man, but the damage was done. The trust between the two departments, a fragile thing built over years of shared tragedies and triumphs, had been shattered on the hot asphalt of I-15, and all the king's horses and all the king's men might not be able to put it back together again. The phone call from Battalion Chief Wallace to Fire Department headquarters was not a report. It was a declaration of war. He spoke to Assistant Chief Mike Reynolds, his voice a tightly controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shout. He laid out the facts: a 6-car pileup, a textbook rescue operation underway, and then the unwarranted illegal arrest of his senior captain by a sheriff's deputy over a safety lane. On the other end of the line, Reynolds listened in stunned silence, his pen frozen over his notepad. He had been in fire administration for 15 years, and he had heard his share of interagency squabbles. But this was unprecedented. Arresting the incident commander was the nuclear option. It was a complete breakdown of the system. Dan, are you telling me a deputy put Marcus Thorne in handcuffs and drove him off the scene? Reynolds asked, needing to hear it again to believe it. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Mike, for doing his job, for protecting our people, the scene went to hell in a handbasket the second they took him. We lost critical time on the extrication. The police sergeant on scene now seems to get it. But the damage is done, Wallace reported. Where is Marcus now? The deputy, a hothead named Brennan, is supposedly bringing him back after his sergeant tore him a new one over the radio. But that doesn't change what happened. This cannot stand. Mike, this isn't a simple mistake. This is an assault on our department. Reynolds' mind was already churning. Calculating the fallout, the immediate operational impact was bad enough, but the political and legal ramifications were astronomical. This would ignite a firestorm with the county board of supervisors, the unions, and the media. I'm on my way to the scene, Reynolds said. You call the union president. I'll call the fire chief. He's going to want to talk to the sheriff directly. This goes to the top, immediately. Across town, in the sheriff's department, Sergeant Jacob Miller's official report hit the system with the force of a battering ram. He had flagged it urgent, supervisor review required, and sent a direct email to his lieutenant and captain with the subject line, Unlawful arrest of fire personnel, I-15 incident. The lieutenant, a man named Henderson, read the preliminary report and felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He immediately walked into the office of his captain, Maria Sanchez. Maria, you need to see this. Brennan arrested a fire captain on the freeway. Captain Sanchez, a sharp, politically savvy commander, read the report, her expression hardening. Over a lane closure? Is he insane? She knew Brennan's name from his file. It was a thin file, but one marked by a few too many citizen complaints about his attitude. All of them deemed unfounded after he gave his version of events. She realized now that they had likely missed a pattern. Where is Brennan now? Sergeant Miller has him en route back to the scene to return Captain Thorne. Miller has already relieved him of duty, Henderson said. Good, Sanchez said, though she knew it was nowhere near enough. Get internal affairs on the line. I want a team spun up right now. I want Brennan and his partner, Gable, brought directly to headquarters the second they are clear from that scene. They will be separated and give their statements tonight, no exceptions. And get me the fire department's command staff roster. I need to call my counterpart and start doing damage control. But it was too late for damage control. The fire was already spreading. The fire chief, a formidable man named Carl Jennings, had already left a blistering voicemail for Sheriff Bill Thompson. The union presidents of both the Firefighters Association and the Deputy Sheriff's Guild were calling their respective members, lighting up phone lines with the explosive news. In the world of first responders, where mutual respect is the bedrock of survival, this was an act of profound betrayal. Sheriff Thompson, a politician at heart, was in a meeting with a county supervisor when his assistant interrupted, her face pale. Sheriff, you need to take this call. It's Fire Chief Jennings, and he sounds furious. Thompson took the call in his private office. He listened for 5 minutes, his face growing progressively grimmer. Carl, I am so sorry, he said, the words sounding hollow even to himself. I have no defense for this. I will get to the bottom of it, and I assure you, the deputy involved will be held accountable to the fullest extent. Accountability better be swift and it better be public. Bill, Jennings retorted, your department just told every firefighter in this county that their safety doesn't matter, that our command structure is a joke. You have any idea how dangerous that is? The next time we're on a scene together, my guys are going to be looking over their shoulders for your deputies instead of the fire. You fix this. You fix it now. The call ended. Sheriff Thompson sat in his leather chair, the silence of his office pressing in on him. He buzzed his assistant. Cancel the rest of my day, he said, his voice heavy. And get me Captain Sanchez and the head of internal affairs in my office in 10 minutes. We have a 5-alarm fire, and it's in our own house. Hours later, long after the victims had been airlifted from the scene and the wreckage cleared, the two key players sat in separate, sterile rooms at Sheriff's Department headquarters, telling their stories. The contrast between the two interviews was a study in professionalism versus self-preservation. Captain Marcus Thorne sat opposite two investigators from Internal Affairs. He was out of his dirty turnout gear, back in his station uniform. He looked tired, but his demeanor was unflappable. He recounted the events of the day with the dispassionate clarity of a pilot describing a near miss. He spoke in facts, not feelings. I established incident command at approximately 14:05 hours, he began, his voice steady. Based on the positioning of the primary vehicle and the nature of the entrapment, I determined a full northbound lane closure was required for rescue personnel safety per County Fire Operational Procedure 301.4. He detailed the arrival of Deputy Brennan, their conversation and his repeated explanations for why the lane needed to stay closed. Did Deputy Brennan seem to understand your reasoning? One investigator, a stern-faced detective named Collins, asked, No. Thorne stated simply, his focus was singular, traffic flow. He did not appear to grasp, or did not care to grasp, the tactical realities of the rescue operation. He perceived my refusal to compromise the safety of my crew as an act of defiance, rather than a command decision. And at the moment of the arrest, were you physically resisting him? Negative, Thorne said. I stated my position and turned to resume my duties. He initiated physical contact. I told him to remove his hand. He then informed me I was under arrest. I made a command decision to comply with the arrest to prevent the situation from escalating into a physical confrontation between my firefighters and the deputies. My primary responsibility was to the integrity of the scene. He never raised his voice. He never used inflammatory language. He simply laid out the sequence of events, citing protocols and training. His statement was a masterclass in professional documentation. He wasn't building a case. He was merely reporting the facts as they had occurred. The strength of his testimony was in its unshakable, unemotional foundation of competence and duty. He was a commander reporting a catastrophic failure in an Allied unit's discipline. 10 doors down the hall, Deputy Kyle Brennan's interview was a different animal entirely. He sat across from a different set of investigators, but the atmosphere was thick with his defensive energy. He was agitated, gesturing emphatically, his voice laced with indignation. He was not reporting, he was justifying. Look, I get to the scene, and it's a mess, Brennan began, leaning forward. Traffic is a nightmare. This fire captain, Thorne, is just standing there. I told him, respectfully, that we needed to get a lane open. It was a clear officer safety issue with traffic backing up like that. The investigator, a veteran lieutenant named Harris, raised an eyebrow. You felt the traffic backup was a greater safety risk than the one faced by the firefighters working on the active rescue? Absolutely. Secondary collisions, road rage. You have to see the big picture, Brennan insisted. He was being completely uncooperative. I gave him a lawful order to clear the lane, and he flat out refused. He got in my face. His tone was aggressive. He was escalating the situation. So you felt threatened? Harris asked, his voice neutral. I felt he was a challenge to lawful authority, Brennan corrected, avoiding the trap. He was puffing his chest out, trying to play the big shot. When he refused the order, that's obstruction. It's textbook. I did everything by the book. He left me no choice. Throughout his 2-hour interview, Brennan painted a picture of a fire captain who was arrogant, insubordinate, and out of control. He embellished Thorne's words, claiming the captain had been hostile and belligerent. He characterized his own actions as a measured, necessary response to a threat to public order. He was building a narrative, a reality in which he was the hero who had bravely stood up to a rogue official. But his story had holes. He couldn't adequately explain why he didn't call for a supervisor before making the arrest. He couldn't articulate any specific threat Thorne posed that justified immediate physical custody. His justifications kept circling back to the same core theme. He wouldn't listen to me. When the investigators from both rooms compared notes later that night, the disparity was glaring. One man had provided a clear, protocol-driven account of a professional disagreement that was escalated into an illegal arrest by the other party. The other man had spun a self-serving tale of defiance and obstruction, a narrative designed to paint his own shocking breach of conduct as a heroic act of law enforcement. But stories were just stories. Words were just words. In a secure digital locker on the department's server, the objective truth was waiting. The dash cam and body cam footage had been uploaded, and it was about to render one of these statements a work of fiction. The next morning, in a small, darkened conference room at sheriff's headquarters, the truth began to unspool at 30 frames per second. The audience was small but powerful. Sheriff Bill Thompson, Fire Chief Carl Jennings, Captain Maria Sanchez, Assistant Fire Chief Mike Reynolds, and the lead internal affairs investigator, Detective Collins. The air was thick with a tense, formal silence. This wasn't a collaborative meeting. It was a court-martial, and everyone knew who was on trial. Collins controlled the laptop connected to the large monitor. "We will begin with the dash camera footage from Deputy Brennan's vehicle," he said, his voice flat. The video began, showing Brennan's aggressive drive up the shoulder, the siren wailing. The first words captured were Brennan's, spoken to his partner, Gable. "Look at this mess. Bet you $1 the fire guys are taking their sweet time." The comment, dripping with disdain, landed like a stone in the silent room. Sheriff Thompson's jaw tightened. The footage showed Brennan's arrival, his arrogant stride, his immediate confrontation with Thorne. The audio was clear. The camera, mounted on the dashboard, provided a wide, damning view of the entire interaction. It showed Thorne, calm and professional. It showed Brennan, agitated and demanding. It captured Thorne's clear, concise explanation of the need for a safety zone. It captured Brennan's dismissive response. "He's not even listening to him," Chief Jennings muttered, his anger a low burn. Then came the pivotal moment. The monitor showed Thorne's dismissal and his turn away from Brennan. Collins paused the video. According to Deputy Brennan's statement, this is when Captain Thorne became aggressive and hostile. He pressed play. The audio captured Thorne's voice, firm but controlled. "Get your hands off me, Deputy!" There was no aggression, only a stunned reaction to being grabbed. The camera then showed Brennan escalating, drawing his weapon, and the terrified, angry reaction of the firefighters. Sheriff Thompson physically flinched at the sight of his deputy pulling a gun on a group of unarmed firefighters. "My God," Captain Sanchez whispered. Collins switched to Brennan's body camera footage. The view was chaotic, visceral. The audience was now seeing the confrontation from Brennan's perspective. They saw the cold fury in Thorne's eyes when he was told he was under arrest. They heard the metallic ratchet of the handcuffs. And then, as Brennan marched the captain to his car, they heard Thorne's final chilling words. "You better pray those people in that van live, Deputy, because you just became responsible for whatever happens next." Finally, Collins played the footage from Deputy Gable's body camera. It was perhaps the most damning of all. It showed not only Brennan's out-of-control behavior, but Gable's complete and total passivity. He stood by, a silent witness, a uniformed statue, as his partner committed career suicide and assaulted a fellow first responder. His inaction was a clear violation of the department's duty to intervene policy. When the last video ended, the screen went black. But the images were burned into the minds of everyone in the room. The silence stretched for a full minute. Sheriff Thompson, his face ashen, was the first to speak. "There is no ambiguity here," he said, his voice heavy with a mixture of rage and shame. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a flagrant, inexcusable abuse of authority. Deputy Brennan's report is a work of fiction. He lied. Fire Chief Jennings, for his part, looked not triumphant, but deeply saddened. "My captain acted with more restraint than I thought humanly possible. Bill, he de-escalated by allowing himself to be arrested, but he should never have been put in that position. Captain Sanchez looked at her sheriff. Sir, the legal exposure here is off the charts. Unlawful arrest, false imprisonment, brandishing a weapon, interfering with an emergency rescue. And that's before the civil suit, which is coming. I know, Thompson said. He looked at Collins. What's next? We'll be conducting a second interview with Deputy Brennan, Collins said. This time, he'll be read his Garrity rights and his Miranda rights. The interview will be prosecutorial. We will also be interviewing Deputy Gable regarding his failure to intervene. Based on this video, I will be recommending the immediate termination of both deputies. Sheriff Thompson nodded slowly. The video hadn't just told a story. It had passed a sentence. It had exposed Brennan's lies, confirmed Thorne's professionalism, and sealed the fate of 2 careers. The unblinking eye of the camera had delivered a verdict long before any judge or jury ever would. And that verdict was guilty. The damning video evidence was the key that unlocked a door Brennan had kept carefully sealed. With the internal affairs investigation now in overdrive, Detective Collins and his team began a deep dive into Deputy Brennan's entire 5-year history with the department. They weren't just looking at the I-15 incident anymore. They were looking for a pattern, and it didn't take them long to find one. They started with the formal complaints. There were 4 of them, all from traffic stops. A 45-year-old businessman who claimed Brennan had been unnecessarily hostile and demeaning after pulling him over for a minor speeding violation. A young woman who reported that Brennan had tried to intimidate her into consenting to a vehicle search without probable cause. A truck driver who alleged Brennan had threatened him with a slew of citations for having a bad attitude in each case. Brennan's official report had painted the citizen as argumentative and uncooperative, and in each case, without video evidence to contradict him, the complaint had been classified as unfounded and filed away. 4 complaints in 5 years isn't a huge number, Collins remarked to his partner. A younger detective named Sims, but look at the narrative. It's the same every time. Someone questions his authority, and he responds with overwhelming aggression and then frames them as the aggressor in his report. It's the exact same playbook he tried to use with Captain Thorne. But the formal complaints were just the tip of the iceberg. Collins started making quiet phone calls to sergeants who had supervised Brennan, both past and present. He spoke to deputies who had been his partners. He spoke off the record, promising anonymity, and slowly, a more detailed picture emerged. It was a picture of a deputy with a profound superiority complex, particularly towards anyone who wasn't a fellow cop. One sergeant recalled an incident where Brennan had berated a paramedic for parking an ambulance in a way he felt was inconvenient, even though it was the best position for patient loading. He's got this thing about other uniforms, the sergeant explained. Fire, EMS. He sees them as subordinates, not partners. We told him to knock it off, but he's got a real chip on his shoulder. A former partner, a deputy who had requested a transfer after 6 months of riding with Brennan, was even more candid. Kyle's a bully, he stated flatly. He's fine as long as everyone is saying, yes, sir. But the second someone pushes back, even just asking a simple question, he sees it as a personal challenge. He can't stand not being the one in total control. I told my sergeant it was only a matter of time before he pulled a stunt that would get him fired. Looks like his time came. The investigators also discovered a series of use of force reports that, while technically within policy, showed a clear pattern of quick escalation. Suspects who were verbally non-compliant were often met with immediate physical control tactics. Brennan wasn't a deputy who used de-escalation. He was one who used domination. They compiled everything: the formal complaints, the anecdotal reports from supervisors and peers, the use of force history, A clear and disturbing portrait emerged of a young officer drunk on his own authority, enabled by a system that had, until now, been willing to take his word over that of the citizens he policed. His partner, Gable, was a different but equally troubling story. His file was clean, almost too clean. He had no complaints, no commendations, no use of force reports. He was a ghost, a man who floated through his career by making no waves, by being invisible. And his invisibility had made him the perfect partner for a bully like Brennan. His silence was his consent. Collins typed up his summary report for Captain Sanchez and Sheriff Thompson. The arrest of Captain Thorne was not an isolated incident or a momentary lapse in judgment, he wrote. It was the predictable culmination of a documented, multi-year pattern of behavior characterized by arrogance, an inability to accept outside authority, and a quickness to escalate verbal confrontations into physical ones. Deputy Brennan is a liability that the department has failed to address. Deputy Gable's pattern of inaction, particularly in the face of his partner's clear misconduct, constitutes a grave failure to uphold his duties. The investigation had started with one man's catastrophic decision on a highway. It had now become an indictment of a system that had ignored the warning signs, that had filed away the complaints, and that had allowed a ticking time bomb to wear a badge and carry a gun. The bomb had finally gone off and the shrapnel was hitting everyone. Armed with the irrefutable video and the newly uncovered pattern of abuse, Sheriff Thompson knew he had to act swiftly and decisively. The usual slow-moving gears of internal discipline were not an option. This was a public relations inferno, and he needed a fire break. He summoned Brennan and Gable to his office separately. Brennan arrived first, still clinging to a shred of defiant self-righteousness. He clearly believed this was a meeting where he could explain himself, where his version of events would be heard. He was wrong. Sheriff Thompson, Captain Sanchez, and Detective Collins were waiting for him. The atmosphere was glacial. "Deputy Brennan," the sheriff began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I have reviewed the entire unedited video of your interaction with Fire Captain Marcus Thorne. I have reviewed your official statement, and I have read your file. Your statement is a fabrication. Your actions on that highway were a disgrace to this department and a betrayal of the public trust. You endangered the lives of civilians and first responders alike. You abused your authority in the most flagrant way I have seen in my 20-year career." Brennan's face went white. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer a rebuttal, but the sheriff cut him off. "Do not speak. You have done enough damage with your words. Effective immediately. You are on unpaid administrative leave pending termination. I want your badge, your ID, and your service weapon. Now." Stunned into silence, Brennan slowly, mechanically, unclipped his badge from his uniform shirt. He placed it on the sheriff's large mahogany desk. The metal made a soft, final sound. He followed it with his ID and his holstered Glock, the symbols of his power stripped from him in an instant. He looked up, his eyes pleading, but he found no sympathy in the faces watching him. He was escorted from the office, his career effectively over. Gable's meeting was shorter but no less brutal. "Deputy Gable," Sheriff Thompson said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I watched you stand there. I watched you do nothing as your partner committed a criminal act. Your silence makes you complicit. Your failure to intervene is as great a sin as his action. You are also suspended without pay, pending termination." Gable, ever the quiet one, simply nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He had built a career on being invisible, and now he was being fired for it. The official announcement came an hour later. The department's public information officer released a carefully worded statement. The sheriff's department has opened a formal investigation into the detainment of a county fire captain. The 2 deputies involved have been suspended without pay, and Sheriff Thompson has personally assured Fire Chief Jennings that a swift and thorough investigation will be conducted to ensure full accountability. But the press release was a single drop of water on a raging grease fire. The local news had already gotten wind of the story, likely leaked from the Firefighters Union. By the 5 o'clock news, it was the lead story. A news helicopter had footage of the chaotic scene, showing Thorne being placed in the patrol car. A witness who had been stuck in the traffic jam had cell phone video of the confrontation. The narrative was out, and it was devastating for the sheriff's department. The phones at headquarters rang off the hook. The County Board of Supervisors demanded an emergency meeting. The district attorney's office called, inquiring about potential criminal charges against Brennan, and the Firefighters Union, as promised, went on the offensive. Their president, a fiery orator named Ken Mallory, held a press conference on the steps of the Fire Administration Building, flanked by dozens of uniformed firefighters, including a stoic Marcus Thorne. Yesterday, Captain Marcus Thorne, a 32-year veteran of this department, was arrested for doing his job, Mallory thundered, his voice booming from the microphones. He was arrested for following protocol and protecting the lives of his crew. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an act of assault by an out-of-control deputy, an act that represents a profound disrespect for every firefighter who puts their life on the line. We demand more than a suspension. We demand the termination and criminal prosecution of this deputy, and we demand a top-to-bottom review of the Sheriff's Department's training and policies to ensure this never, ever happens again. The battle lines were drawn. The initial incident was over, but the war had just begun. The Sheriff's Department was in full-blown crisis mode, facing a legal, political, and public relations nightmare of its own making, and in the center of it all was Marcus Thorne. No longer a victim, but a symbol of professional integrity, a symbol his union was now prepared to use as a battering ram to demand systemic change. The Firefighters Union press conference was the opening salvo in what quickly became a scorched earth campaign. Union President Ken Mallory was a shrewd and relentless operator, and he saw the arrest of Marcus Thorne not just as an injustice to be rectified, but as a golden opportunity to address long-simmering grievances with the Sheriff's Department over funding, resources, and jurisdictional respect. He had the perfect victim, a decorated, unimpeachable veteran, and he had the perfect evidence on video. He intended to leverage both to their absolute maximum potential. The union immediately took out full-page ads in the local newspaper. They featured a powerful high-contrast photo of Thorne, his face grim and determined. The headline screamed, "He was arrested for protecting his crew. Who protects them?" The ad urged citizens to call the sheriff and the county board of supervisors to demand accountability. They launched a social media campaign with the hashtag #StandWithThorne, which quickly went viral in the region. Fire departments from neighboring counties and even other states began posting messages of solidarity. Behind the scenes, the union's lawyers were working hand in glove with a high-powered civil rights attorney they had hired for Thorne. The lawsuit was being prepared, and it was designed to be a weapon of mass destruction. It wouldn't just name Brennan and Gable, it would name Sheriff Thompson, the department itself, and the county, alleging a systemic failure in training, supervision, and discipline. They were not just seeking damages for Thorne, they were seeking a federally mandated consent decree to oversee reforms in the Sheriff's Department. The Deputy Sheriff's Guild found itself in an impossible position. Privately, most deputies were appalled by Brennan's actions. They knew he had crossed a line and made them all look bad. But the union's primary directive was to defend its members, even the ones who were clearly in the wrong. They were contractually obligated to provide legal representation for Brennan and Gable during the termination hearings. Their public statements were weak and defensive, talking about due process and letting the investigation play out, which sounded feeble and evasive compared to the firefighters' righteous fury. The Guild was hemorrhaging public support and credibility. The conflict paralyzed county government. The Board of Supervisors meetings became public spectacles, with the chamber packed with off-duty firefighters in red Union T-shirts on one side and a smaller, grimmer contingent of sheriff's deputies on the other. Speakers from the public excoriated the sheriff's department for its arrogance and incompetence. County attorneys, seeing the legal writing on the wall, went into full damage control mode. They held a tense meeting with Sheriff Thompson. "Bill, the video is a kill shot." The lead counsel, a woman named Eleanor Vance, told him bluntly, "There is no defense for what Brennan did. Zero. The only question now is how much this is going to cost the taxpayers. The firefighters' union knows they have us over a barrel, and they are going to demand a fortune." "So what do you suggest?" Thompson asked, the strain of the past week showing on his face. "We need to get ahead of this," Vance said. "We fire Brennan and Gable immediately. We issue a formal public apology to Captain Thorne and the entire fire department. We volunteer for an independent outside review of our policies. We need to show the court and the public that we are taking this seriously and making changes. It's our only hope of mitigating the damages." But any attempt at a quiet settlement was a non-starter for Ken Mallory and the firefighters' union. They didn't want a quiet apology. They wanted a public hanging. They wanted heads to roll, and they wanted a court-ordered, legally binding promise that it would never happen again. "They're talking about a settlement," Mallory told Thorne in a private meeting. "A few million, a handshake, and it all goes away." Thorne, who had been stoic throughout the public ordeal, shook his head. "It's not about the money, Ken. It's about the principle. That deputy, Brennan, he thought he was a law unto himself. He thought his badge gave him the right to endanger my crew because his ego was bruised. If we let them settle this quietly, what happens to the next firefighter who stands up to a cop like that? What happens when there isn't a video camera? No, we see this through. We go to court." Mallory smiled. It was exactly what he wanted to hear. The unions were at war, and they would accept nothing less than unconditional surrender. The county's offer of an olive branch was about to be met with a declaration that the fight had only just begun. 9 months later, the conference room was a battlefield of paper and muted aggression. The federal civil rights lawsuit, Thorne versus San Bernardino County et al., had moved into the discovery phase. Today was the centerpiece of that phase, the deposition of the now-fired Kyle Brennan. Marcus Thorne was there, sitting silently next to his attorney, a sharp, formidable litigator named Benjamin Carter. Across the long table sat Brennan, his lawyer from the deputies' union, and a team of attorneys representing the county. Brennan, now in a civilian suit that fit him poorly, had lost the arrogant swagger he'd possessed on the highway. In the months since his termination, the reality of his situation had sunk in. He was unemployed, unemployable in law enforcement, and facing financial ruin, but a flicker of his old self-righteousness remained. He still believed, on some fundamental level, that he had been the one in the right. Carter's job was to extinguish that flicker for good. For the first hour, Carter was deceptively gentle, asking Brennan to recount his training, his experience, and his understanding of the incident command system. Brennan answered confidently, trying to portray himself as a knowledgeable, by-the-book officer. Then, Carter's tone shifted. "Mr. Brennan, let's talk about your arrival on the I-15 scene. In your initial statement to Internal Affairs, you described Captain Thorne as aggressive and hostile. Is that correct?" "Yes." "He was very confrontational," Brennan said, sitting up straighter. Carter nodded, then gestured to a large monitor at the end of the table. "Let's take a look." He played the dash cam footage of the initial encounter. The room was silent as they watched the calm, professional Thorne and the agitated, demanding Brennan. When the clip ended, Carter paused it on a close-up of Thorne's face. "Mr. Brennan, you are under oath. Please point to the moment in that video where Captain Thorne is being aggressive or hostile." Brennan stared at the screen. He sputtered. "Well, it's his tone. You had to be there." "I feel like I am there. Mr. Brennan, we are all there, watching this video," Carter said coolly. "His tone appears to be that of a commander giving information. Your tone, however, seems quite demanding. Would you agree?" "I was trying to restore order to a chaotic scene," Brennan insisted. Carter then played the clip of Brennan drawing his service weapon. "Was Captain Thorne armed, Mr. Brennan?" "No." "Were any of the firefighters who were approaching you armed?" "No." "Then why did you draw your firearm?" "I felt the situation was escalating. They were moving toward me. I felt my safety was at risk," Brennan said, falling back on the boilerplate justification. Carter leaned forward. "Or were you, in fact, using your firearm to intimidate a group of unarmed public servants who were justifiably shocked that you were assaulting their commanding officer?" The union lawyer objected, but the question hung in the air, a perfectly aimed shot. Carter moved on, systematically deconstructing every lie and embellishment from Brennan's initial report. He used the video as a hammer, playing a clip and then forcing Brennan to reconcile his sworn testimony with the undeniable reality on the screen. Brennan's confident facade began to crack. His answers became shorter, more evasive. "I don't recall," became his refrain. The final blow came when Carter turned to Brennan's history. He brought up the 4 prior citizen complaints, reading excerpts from them. "The complainant stated you were hostile and demeaning. The complainant alleged you tried to intimidate her into a search. The complainant said you threatened him for having a bad attitude." Carter looked up from the papers. "Mr. Brennan, a pattern seems to emerge here, doesn't it? When your authority is questioned, even in the mildest of ways, you respond with intimidation and aggression. And then you characterize the other party as the aggressor in your reports. Isn't that exactly what you did to Captain Thorne?" Brennan's face was pale, slick with sweat. He looked to his lawyer, who could offer no help. He looked at the county attorneys, who stared at the table, refusing to make eye contact. He was utterly, completely alone. I was doing my job," he stammered, the words hollow and meaningless. Carter leaned back in his chair. His work done. Over the course of 4 grueling hours, he had not only destroyed Brennan's credibility, but had also gotten him to admit, under oath, that Thorne had never physically threatened him and that his initial report contained discrepancies. He had everything he needed for trial. As they packed up their briefcases, one of the county attorneys approached Carter. "Mr. Carter, perhaps we can talk. I think we may be in a position to resolve this matter." Carter glanced over at Thorne, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The deposition had been a rout. Brennan had collapsed, and with him, any hope the county had of defending the case. The war was over. All that was left was to negotiate the terms of the surrender. Despite the county's last-minute attempts to settle, Thorne and his legal team refused. This wasn't just about compensation. It was about public vindication. Thorne wanted the facts of his case heard in open court, not settled in a quiet backroom deal. He wanted a jury of his peers to hear what happened on that highway and pass judgment. The county, trapped by its own deputies' lies, was forced to proceed to a trial they knew they could not win. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and it was a public spectacle. The courtroom was packed every day with firefighters, sheriff's deputies, media, and curious citizens. Ben Carter, Thorne's attorney, put on a masterclass. He presented the case with a simple, powerful narrative, A good man doing his job was assaulted by an arrogant official who put ego before public safety. He called Marcus Thorne to the stand first. Thorne was the perfect witness, calm, professional, and utterly credible. He walked the jury through the incident command system, explaining the life and death reasoning behind a safety zone. He recounted the events of that day without a hint of malice or hyperbole, letting the facts speak for themselves. Then, Carter called the other firefighters from Engine 31 to the stand. One by one, they corroborated their captain's story, their testimony filled with raw, genuine emotion as they described the shock and fury of seeing their leader handcuffed and taken away. A paramedic testified about the critical 10 minutes that were lost in the rescue, time during which one of the victims nearly died. The centerpiece of the trial, however, was the video. Carter played the dash cam and body cam footage for the jury on a massive screen. The jurors sat riveted, watching the drama unfold as if they were standing on the asphalt themselves. They saw Brennan's aggression, Thorne's restraint, the drawing of the gun, the click of the handcuffs. The video was more powerful than any testimony could ever be. It was the silent, unshakable witness that condemned Brennan and the department that had failed to stop him. The county's defense was an exercise in futility. Their lawyers tried to argue that Brennan had made a mistake in judgment under a stressful situation, but that his actions weren't malicious. They put Brennan on the stand, and it was a disaster. Carter's cross-examination was brutal, using Brennan's own deposition testimony to trap him in a web of contradictions and lies. Brennan came across as bitter, defensive, and utterly unsympathetic. He was a villain of his own making. In his closing argument, Carter stood before the jury, his voice ringing with passion. "This is not just about one firefighter and one deputy," he declared. "This is about the trust we place in those who wear a badge. It's about the principle that public safety cannot be sacrificed for personal ego." Captain Thorne was not just defending his crew, he was defending the integrity of the entire system. "Your verdict will send a message. It will tell every first responder in this nation whether the rule of law protects the protectors, or if the law is simply what the man with the biggest ego says it is." The jury was out for less than 4 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, the foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. He read the decision, his voice clear in the silent room. "On the charge of unlawful arrest, we find for the plaintiff, Marcus Thorne. On the charge of false imprisonment, we find for the plaintiff. On the charge of violation of civil rights, we find for the plaintiff." He then moved on to the damages. The courtroom held its breath. For compensatory damages, the jury awards Captain Thorne $500,000 for punitive damages designed to punish the sheriff's department for its gross negligence and to deter future misconduct. The jury awards the sum of $30 million. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. $30.5 million. It was a staggering, monumental figure, one of the largest verdicts of its kind ever awarded in the state. It was more than a verdict. It was a roar. It was a jury of ordinary citizens shouting that what happened on that highway was not just wrong, but intolerably so. Thorne sat stoically, but his attorney patted his back, a wide smile on his face. The firefighters in the audience erupted in cheers. The message had been sent, and it had been delivered with the force of a thunderclap, a shock wave that would be felt in every police and fire station across the country. Justice for Captain Marcus Thorne had finally been served. The jury's verdict was the final, non-negotiable end to Kyle Brennan's life in law enforcement. Faced with the public humiliation and the staggering financial judgment against the county, the sheriff's department completed its termination process. Brennan was fired for gross misconduct, abuse of authority, and dishonesty. The state's Peace Officer Standards and Training Board permanently revoked his certification, ensuring he could never work as a cop in the state again. His name became a cautionary tale, a verb used in training academies to describe the ultimate failure of judgment. "Don't pull a Brennan," instructors would say. His partner, Frank Gable, was also terminated for his failure to intervene. His silent complicity had cost him his career and his pension. He faded back into the obscurity he had so clearly craved, a ghost haunted by the consequences of the one moment he chose not to act. The fallout didn't stop there. The massive verdict forced the County Board of Supervisors to take action. They brought in an outside consultant to completely overhaul the Sheriff's Department's policies on interagency cooperation and use of force. A new mandatory training program was created, co-taught by senior fire and police commanders, centered around the I-15 incident. The dashcam footage of Brennan's meltdown became required viewing for every new recruit. Sheriff Thompson won his next election, but barely. He did so only by publicly embracing the reforms and repeatedly apologizing for his department's failure. He made Captain Thorne a personal, public apology and presented him with a departmental commendation for his professionalism and restraint under extreme duress. It was a political move, but a necessary one. Marcus Thorne, for his part, handled the aftermath with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout the ordeal. After a mandatory leave of absence, he returned to his post as captain of Engine 31 when he walked into the firehouse for his first shift back. His entire crew was there to greet him, standing in formation. They didn't cheer or applaud, they simply stood in solidarity, a silent, powerful show of respect for the leader who had endured a public crucifixion to protect them. Thorne donated a significant portion of the settlement to a charity for the families of fallen firefighters and to a legal fund designed to help first responders who were wrongly accused or mistreated. He didn't want the money to define him. The principle had been his victory, not the cash. He went back to work, commanding his crew at fires and accidents, his authority on any scene now unquestioned. Cops who arrived at his incidents, many of whom had followed the trial closely, treated him with a newfound deference. He was not just a fire captain anymore. He was a living legend, the man who had faced down the law and won. His ordeal had forced a permanent, seismic shift in the culture of cooperation between the agencies. His personal nightmare had become a catalyst for systemic change, ensuring that what happened to him would be far less likely to happen to anyone else. The final reckoning had been delivered, not just for one man, but for an entire system. The echo of the gavel fades, but the lessons remain, etched into the institutional memory of two departments. To understand how this was allowed to happen, we must look into the mind of the man who lit the fuse. Kyle Brennan was not inherently evil. He was a product of a culture that sometimes mistakes aggression for authority and compliance for respect. His worldview was a simple one. There are those who give orders and those who take them. In his mind, his badge placed him permanently in the first category, the sight of a firefighter, a man he viewed as a glorified mechanic, calmly defying his order was not a jurisdictional disagreement. It was a tear in the fabric of his universe. His rage was the rage of insecurity. If he had approached the scene with curiosity instead of certainty, asking, "Captain, help me understand your tactical needs," the entire disaster could have been averted. And what of Captain Thorne? What could he have done differently? In truth, likely nothing. He was faced with a man who was not interested in reason, only in dominance. If Thorne had been more deferential, Brennan would have seen it as weakness and pushed harder. If he had been more aggressive, Brennan would have used it as a justification for his own escalation. Thorne's only winning move was the one he made, to remain the consummate professional, to trust in the evidence of his own integrity, and to allow the system, however flawed, to ultimately correct itself. His true protection was not a better argument, but a lifetime of unwavering professionalism that made Brennan's lies so obviously false. He proved that true authority is not taken by force. It is earned through competence and granted by the respect of those you lead. The story of Thorne and Brennan is a stark reminder that the greatest threats on an emergency scene are not always the flames or the twisted metal. Sometimes, the most dangerous element is the human ego. It reminds us that a uniform is not a license for arrogance, but a symbol of public trust, a trust that is easily broken and painfully difficult to repair. What do you think? Was the $30.5 million verdict fair, or was it excessive? Have you ever witnessed a conflict between different emergency services in your own town? Share your story in the comments below. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. Hit that like button and subscribe for more.